Ever watched a familiar childhood cartoon dubbed into another language? Hearing Winnie the Pooh speak French is a uniquely unsettling experience. You watch the exact same cuddly bear on screen, but the audio feels entirely disconnected from the physical character. We tend to think of translation as a clean, mathematical process. Swap an English word for a French word, like honey for miel, and meaning carries over. The French translation is competent, but the thing that makes Pooh, Pooh completely vanishes. You can perfectly replicate the plot and match the vocabulary verbatim, but moving the physical words across a border does not bring the actual intent along with them. Nailing the linguistic accuracies still leaves us with a hollowed-out character. Something else, something entirely invisible, is getting lost in the exchange. To see how this breaks down on the written page, look at the opening paragraph of a modern classic, Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling introduces the Dursleys as perfectly normal, thank you very much. The French translates this to a technically correct parfaitement normaux, merci pour eux. But that phrasing creates a subtle glitch. The English version hides its disdain beneath polite, middle-class repression. The French phrasing tips that narration into open, active contempt. The translator did their job, yet the text pushes the narrative in a direction the author never wrote. There is a layer of communication actively manipulating the tone, completely independent of the literal vocabulary. Words alone cannot control what they mean once they cross a border. They are haunted by a cultural ghost that lives strictly beneath the ink. Which brings us back to that missing essence in Pooh's voice. What evaporated in the French dub was a specific English archetype, the lovable, bumbling, aristocratic dimwit. The French dub fails because the French language completely lacks this cultural concept. They have the cynical decadent, or the pompous bourgeois, but they do not have the cuddly aristocrat. Look at their history. Thanks to the violent revolution of the 1790s, French society refuses to view its historical ruling class as harmless or amusing. England, meanwhile, had a post-Victorian emotional settlement. This allowed them to look at the upper class as charming novelties rather than actual threats. Pointed. You cannot translate the joke if the target culture refuses to provide the historical preconditions required to understand it. When we apply this to high literature, the stakes rise considerably. Take the famous opening line of Albert Camus' masterpiece, The Stranger. Maman est morte. Translating this into English forces the word maman into an awkward emotional middle ground. Mother is too cold, mommy is too childish. The English language strips away the specific French drawing room intimacy and the faint infantilism that Camus deliberately anchored to his protagonist, Meursault. This single missing note skews the entire novel for an English reader. We misinterpret Meursault as a cold sociopath, rather than a neurodivergent character struggling to process his environment. Losing that one cultural anchor destroys the entire philosophical core of the novel. These gaps reveal an uncomfortable truth. The failure of translation is the most visible symptom of a deeper flaw in human communication itself. The problem is lossy compression. Think of a raw, abstract thought as this massive, highly detailed shape. Forcing that thought through the tight funnel of your native vocabulary is the first stage of data loss. You inevitably emerge with a simplified block. Taking that already simplified text and translating it into a second language acts as an additional compression stage. Squeezing it through a second funnel degrades the original signal even further, leaving you with fragmented pieces. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein argued that whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. The most critical parts of communication, the embodied, socially saturated ground we stand on, cannot actually be spoken. The tone, the class coding, the precise aristocratic register of a cartoon bear, none of that was ever written in the ink on the page. It existed entirely in the shared cultural water surrounding the text. Words are, at best, rough approximations. Translation isn't a technical problem waiting for better software, because it is the shared history of a people, not the text, that is actually doing the talking.